Good morning. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and our Lewis Lehrman Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those who join us on all of these occasions on our heritage.org website. Would ask everyone here in-house if you'll be so kind to check cell phones to see that they have been muted as we prepare to begin. It's a courtesy to our speakers. And of course, we will post the program on the Heritage homepage following today's presentation for everyone's future reference. Our internet viewers are always welcome to send questions or comments at any time, simply emailing speaker@heritage.org. We are pleased today to co-host this program with our friends at the Non-Proliferation Policy Education Center. As you have noticed, free copies of the book that we are discussing are available for you in the foyer. If you would like one, please be sure and take one before you leave with us today. Hosting our program on behalf of Heritage is Michaela Dodge, who is our Senior Policy Analyst in Defense and Strategic Policy. She specializes on missile defense, nuclear weapons modernization, and arms control. She holds a master's degree in Defense and Strategic Studies from Missouri State University. She received a bachelor's degree in International Relations and Defense and Strategic Studies from Masaryk University in the Czech Republic. She is a former National Security Fellow with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and a former Publius Fellow at the Claremont Institution. She also participates in the Project on Nuclear Issues, Nuclear Scholars Initiative of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Please join me in welcoming Michaela Dodge. Michaela?
Thank you so much, John. Thank you all for coming. Thanks to our speakers and panelists. We are lucky to have three extremely knowledgeable panelists today, and I'm just going to do a abridged version of their bios so that we have more time for a discussion. Our first presenter is Henry Sokolsky, the Executive Director of the Non-Proliferation Policy Education Center. Henry has had a long and distinguished career in the nuclear field, from working at the Pentagon to working at the Senate to the intelligence community. He's an adjunct professor at the Institute for World Politics, and he served as a member of the Commission on the Prevention of Weapons of Mass Destruction, Proliferation, and Terrorism. He's a prolific writer on nuclear non-proliferation issues, and please pick up a copy of the book if you don't have it yet. Our second speaker will be Brian Finley, the Vice President at the Stimson Center, where he established the Managing Across Boundaries initiative, which links diverse threat to common solutions. He helped to form the Cooperative Non-Proliferation Program to address the threat posed by so-called loose nukes back during the time when the Soviet Union was breaking up. Before joining the Stimson Center, Mr. Finley spent time at Health Canada, the Century Foundation, and the Canadian Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade. He's an adjunct instructor at American University's School of International Service. The next speaker is Matt Cronick, an associate professor and international relations field chair at Georgetown. His areas of expertise include nuclear issues, U.S. national security policy, and international relations theory, in addition to counterterrorism. His work has appeared in academic and non-academic journals and newspapers. His most recent book, A Time to Attack, provided timely information to U.S. policymakers with regard to options to keep Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. And we have hosted a book event here at Heritage a few weeks back, and you can find the broadcast on the internet if you're interested on heritage.org. But today, we're here to discuss Underestimated Our Not-So-Peaceful Nuclear Future. And I'd hate to steal Henry's thunder, partly because the topic that he writes on is so important. The book is an attempt to help us to think through the proliferating world, to identify drivers compelling states to pursue nuclear weapon capabilities, and tailor policies to counter their spread. The book is an excellent introductory piece for students of nuclear weapons policy and a good starting point for anyone wishing to find out more about this important issue. Einstein once said, "If I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution." Now, Henry's book perhaps gives us a little more time to think about a solution for he defines a problem. It explores important questions. Will more nuclear weapons deter more wars? What can nuclear weapons past teach us about the future? Why are civilian nuclear programs potentially dangerous and destabilizing? And what should we do about all this? Now, the book will not provide you with an answer. I assume you're working on a sequel.
I hope not. I think this is it.
It directs us to what kind of questions we should ask. Now, defining a problem is one part of the puzzle, and Henry does offer some suggestions to increase chances that we will live in a world with less proliferation as opposed to more. And we're happy to host you back, Henry, and thank you to our distinguished panelists for coming to Heritage.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, and it is very neat to be here with friends, and most of all, to come back. I mean, one of the things I enjoy about being in Washington is you can recycle. I was the first visiting scholar here so long ago. It was 1981, but they still let me come back. So some things are stable in Washington, and I'd like to think the Heritage Foundation is one such place. Now, this is the second of two books. I actually wrote another book about 15 years ago. It was a history, and I wrote the history because I was teaching, and I noticed that there weren't any really decent histories of nonproliferation. In fact, there weren't even bad ones. Partly because it's really hard to do a history about things that didn't happen. When you think about it, it's not easy to figure out how to talk about the history of this field. And as a result, I was a little concerned that it wasn't really a very serious field. I mean, any serious field should have a history. Yeah? So I went about this. I took a different approach to doing history. Instead of talking about what happened, I talked about what it is each initiative that we identify as being a major nonproliferation effort was attempting to prevent. What was their vision of the next war? As you pointed out, Mikola, if you get the problem wrong, the solution is not necessarily going to help you very much. It could make things worse. And one such example that I explored in the book was Atoms for Peace, which had this really fantastic vision of what the next war would be. I mean, we would not be able to understand it. It assumed that the only kinds of wars you would have enormous numbers of weapons on cities. As a result, their idea of preventing nuclear proliferation focused only on preventing the spread of large stockpiles. Needless to say, we ended up with the spread of lots of small stockpiles that later became large. So that one didn't work out so well. Anyway, this book is about the future, and the reason I thought that was necessary is I noticed that every time I tried to get a book about the future of proliferation, it stopped like 3 weeks from now. I mean, in other words, it would be about Iran. What should we do now? It would be about North Korea. What should we do now? But there wasn't anything that sort of projected trends. And I noticed that, again, in any serious field, economics, military science, even, dare I say, political science, they attempt to see trends and then use them to project what might happen in the future. And I thought it was necessary to establish this as a sort of serious field to see if I could do it. Now, what I did then was paint as grim a picture as I could possibly conjure up. And I was very proud of this. And there are all sorts of graphs in the book that show everything really going badly. But I was a little bit taken aback by the reception. I got it published in a number of journals, and it did get read. I mean, I know this because one of the phrases was a sprint to equality. And I noticed Rumsfeld said, we had to worry about a sprint to parity. And I know for a fact, since he used to sit on a board that funded me, that he actually bragged that he read everything I ever wrote. Now, I don't know if I can keep track of what I've written, much less whether I've read all of it. I know I wrote it all. But he claimed to keep track. So I thought, okay, well, that's pretty good. But otherwise, it wasn't much of a reaction. And I thought, now that's odd. I mean, after all, this is a period where, not so long ago, everybody was excited about going to zero nuclear weapons. And I thought, well, surely talking about the spread of these things would be trendy, current. You know? Well, not so much. So since I'd been working on this book roughly for 15 years, I figured putting it aside for a little bit longer wouldn't matter, and that's what I did. Then I got a phone call from a very unlikely place, my former school, which I never finished my PhD, so I figured I'd never get a call from them again. They asked me to come give a lecture. It's John Mearsheimer. And I thought what I would do is take a look at what I thought I knew, which is this theory stuff. Yeah? You know, all the theories about nuclear weapons and see what people thought about nuclear weapons and their spread. And it was very useful because I started to read things I had read, and I reread them, and I read a lot of new things. And one of the things I noticed, which may help explain why my earlier efforts were not quite received with celebration, was that it doesn't matter which school you look at, the school that's against nuclear weapons, the school that's sort of for nuclear weapons, or the school that argues that their spread really doesn't matter. They all seem fairly confident, and in some cases, arguably optimistic, that if you follow their advice carefully, you'll be fine. And I thought that was, I guess I'm going to describe it mildly intemperate to insane. I mean, you know, these things, these weapons, we don't know very much about them. We theorize. This is how you calm yourself down about things that you worry about, that you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, we know these things were used twice. We know they haven't been used since. But after that, you know, there are not too many facts on the board, you know. So we fill in with theories as to, you know, why this was so, whether it'll continue. So I started to look at these three schools. And, you know, you start, of course, I think, with the most popular school, which is the zero school. Now, conservatives, including myself, like to say bad things about the zero crowd. But, you know, they have one advantage. You know, if you've got a bunch of leaders in a room of countries, and you ask them to come up with one number they could agree to, it's probably the only number they could agree to is zero. That's a powerful point. Now, it may be that they can't figure out how to get there, but it has a certain resonance, and you know, people who we respect, including like, you know, Ronald Reagan, sort of mused a little about this themselves. So there's a certain power to zero. But, of course, there are problems. I mean, they downplay the risks of going down, as well as the possibility of others coming up as we do that. They're not so clear about the transition risks. Also, there are other problems. They tend to, I think, emphasize nuclear terrorism to sort of change the subject when you start talking about deterrence and things of that character, which are very difficult for them to deal with. Now, the hawkish supporters, you know, focus on a pretty important truth. They say, well, they've kept the peace. And at some level, this is not only plausible, it seems convincing. I mean, by the way, there is a problem with this, though. I mean, like non-proliferation, it's hard to prove what caused something not to happen. There's something intellectually, I mean, I'm not sure we can prove how anything happened, but, you know, to prove a negative event is like doubly metaphysically burdensome. So there's a problem there. And I think they emphasize the value of nuclear threats and deterring aggression. There's something to this. I mean, it just seems very plausible. But there is a problem. And I think it's that they kind of create arguments that not only defend having nuclear weapons and how they might deter, But if you listen to the arguments, they kind of go too far. They're unbounded. And so you end up, well, if nuclear weapons deter, more nuclear weapons, wouldn't that deter more? And better ones, wouldn't that deter better? And, oh, by the way, wouldn't you want your friends to have them? And then, you're off and running. And it's sort of like, wait a minute, what did I buy into? And, of course, so there's a little tension. Now, most respectable hawks are aware of this, and so they modulate what they say. But it is a problem. So leaves the last school, and these folks I call the radical academic skeptics, and they come in slightly two different flavors, but they're really interesting, and they tend to be denigrated by practitioners because they're theoretical. This is like Mr. Mearsheimer. What they argue is, these weapons automatically deter instantaneously, or that they're useless at this, and the conclusion is the same. Their spread is irrelevant because you don't have to worry about the security consequences. That sounds a little nutty to me, and I'll get into that just in a moment. But one of the things they really do well is they confront and question conventional wisdom along almost all fronts. You take any respectable opinion in Washington, and they'll tell you it's wrong. And so they end up saying a lot of useful things. I think a lot of the things they say are sensible as a result, but not necessarily because they're gyroscopically driven. They're sort of like a good sophist. They make strong arguments weak and weak arguments strong. But there's a lot of academically sound stuff they do. Like they question how likely nuclear terrorism is. And I think that stuff's pretty good. The problem is they kind of downplay or dismiss the value of nuclear deterrence altogether. And I think this leads them into radical arguments about how the spread is not a big deal. And some of them even argue that trying to prevent the spread is dangerous because it starts wars. And so, I don't know, it's a little too radical, if you will, for practitioners to take on. Now, I'll conclude with, well, where am I? This is always the question in Washington after they always ask you, well, where are you now? It's a professional question. It's kind of obnoxious. It's basically, it's a question that poses, why should I talk to you? Will you help me? But I don't know if I'll help you, but I'll tell you where I am. I think fewer probably is better on balance. I mean, fewer is better, but then the counterpoint would be transitions are hell. And so you really have to know what the other fellow has. If you come down, you don't want to be alone. And there may be a limit, until the Brotherhood of Man is unified against, I don't know, the Martian threat. There could be lots of differences of opinion that could lead to war. So you're not going to necessarily be getting rid of these things that easily. But coming down, I think, on balance, if you can, with some transparency, is a good thing. I recommend some things in the book that might help. I'll quickly just list them without explaining them. We might focus on Asia. The center of gravity of the world, I think, is moving to Asia. So what's the biggest thing in Asia? Well, it's China. Focus on that. We were backing into our brief on that. I think focusing on missiles, not just nuclear warheads, may be important because a lot of nuclear warheads are on missiles. And these missiles are getting accurate enough that even if they don't have nuclear warheads, they can produce strategic results. And if you've gone as far as you can with nuclear controls, I always say when you are talking to someone and the conversation's going badly, you change the subject. So focus on missiles, tighten the rules with regard to the spread of peaceful nuclear technology. We are really out of lane on that, and we'll get into that later. I think we need to emphasize timely detection. We're starting to understand that in the case of Iran. And two other things. You want to get to the left of the problem on the timeline. You want to act as early on first indications in a modest fashion, instead of waiting until you either have to, as I say, bomb or grovel your way out of the problem. Early is better. And I think we need to move towards a more hard-headed support and understanding of international law. We tend to either be for international law in a way that's silly or against it in a way that's silly. there is a medium, and that is we had Secretary of War Root turn of the century. He had an understanding of international law that we need to get back to. Now, people look at this list and they say, yes, but that's fine, it's just not practical. Actually, it's a pretty modest list in some respects. I mean, I don't say go to zero. I don't say abandon these things. There are many things that I think there are limits to what you can do. I don't support a whole list of arms control initiatives that the usual arms control crowd supports. And this suggests the final point. If this list of what might help seems overly ambitious, I think we're in more trouble than even the book suggests. And if we're really serious about security, we're going to have to embrace some of these things and be a little more playful and a little bit longer looking at what we're doing than we are right now. So that concludes my overview.
Thank you, Henry. Matt? Sorry, no, Brian.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Michaela, again for really the opportunity to join you here today. And Henry, I'm also grateful to you for what is really, I think, an outstanding contribution to the field. And it's always a pleasure to share the stage, Matthew, with you as well. I mean, 7 to 10 minutes, it's very hard to respond to a book that is as rich as this. And having moderated enough of these, I know that the most important thing is to try to get people to stay within their 7 minutes. So I'm going to try to do that by just talking about two different points. I thought, how do I best serve the cause here this morning? And I thought I would share with you after reading this book, and I really encourage you all to pick it up and give this a very close read. I thought I would share something that I appreciated most and I liked most about this volume, and then also share something that I saw as maybe the biggest gap to start some dialogue. And maybe even point Henry to the third book in the series that maybe this will inspire him to come out of retirement, and do this once again. And as Henry mentioned, you really need to read this book in the context of the earlier volume, the one that really focused much more on the history of non-proliferation. But in many ways, as you will read this, and if you have, you'll see that one thing comes out in all of Henry's writings. He loves to talk about history. And in a city that I think, and in an industry in the think tank world where there is too much kind of baseless pontification upon what side of the bed I got out of on any given day, I really do deeply appreciate Henry's commitment to looking back, looking at trends in history, and building conclusions based upon that. And that alone, I think, is a great contribution. Selfishly, as Michaela mentioned, I teach a class on non-proliferation at American University, and Henry is right that there is no volume that looks quite in this way, that aggregates so much information, so much history, so much of the theory of the field in one place as this volume does. So he did a lot of my homework for me, so I'm especially grateful to him for that. And my students will also be grateful to you, Henry, for putting this all in one place. I think in pointing to some of the challenges, as Henry does in this book, and I particularly recommend you read the whole book, but particularly the last chapter, I think, where he points to potential solutions, and he spoke to those in the closing minutes of his remarks. He paints, and I think quite rightly, a scary picture of potential proliferation threats. But it is not the wide-eyed, frothing at the mouth concern that we see, I think, way too often in this field. And the title, maybe even subliminally, I think gets at that. It's the not so peaceful. It's not the catastrophic future, the sky is falling future, that he gives us hope, I think, in this volume, that through a series of pragmatic activities, we can, I think, we can get our arms around the growing challenge of proliferation. And the sky really is, I think, not falling. And it's difficult, I think, in the current environment to come to that conclusion. We look at the rise of ISIS. We look at a Middle East that is burning. We look at an economy that is still in many ways flagging. We look at a potential nuclear-armed Iran. We look at a nuclear-armed North Korea. All of these, we look at uncertainty in China. All of these factors, I think, contribute to a narrative in many of our minds, I think in this town, that the sky truly is falling. But if we set it in I think, the context of history, as Henry does in this book and in his previous volume, I think it's easier to conclude that these are manageable challenges. And he does provide a roadmap that I think is very sensible at getting at many of the issues. If we think back just 40 or 50 years to the 1960s in this country, and we place our national security, our proliferation situation, and kind of our broader lot as a country in that context, today seems not so scary. It seems not so scary at all. So think about, we were in the midst of the Cold War. We had literally thousands of strategic warheads that were on so-called hair trigger alert, pointed at one another across the Soviet Union. Duck and cover ads were being blared across television screens. At the height of the Vietnam War, 500 to 1,000 American soldiers were being shipped back to the United States a month in coffins. And of course, here at home, we saw the assassination of 3 major political figures in the 1960s. We saw major race riots that were burning American cities. Placed in that context, I mean, think of what CNN would have done today in an environment of the 1960s. Any one of those things would have given Anderson Cooper an aneurysm. I mean, it was a remarkable sort of breadth of domestic and national security challenges that we faced. So I think looking, as Henry does, in the context of the wider sweep of our atomic history, we can get our arms around these challenges. It's quite clear to me. So I want to thank Henry for contributing to that, and I really encourage you, as I say, to look not just at this volume, but at the one he did previously as well on our proliferation history. So that said, let me turn to an area that I think might encourage Henry to come out of retirement and think maybe a little bit more broadly about how we begin to. You're written. They said this is your last book, Henry. Huh?
I'd like it to be the last one.
I'm working on them already. Despite what I just said, it's clear, and it's clear in reading this volume, that the proliferation threat is very real, and it's morphing, and it's changing. And I appreciate Henry's pragmatism in this book, looking at the solutions related to China, to the role of the International Atomic Energy Agency, what is the future of nuclear power, the need to be preemptive and thoughtful in developing solutions and acting quickly and sooner rather than later on nuclear threats. I agree with all of that. As I say, in reading the last chapter, I think it's what's most striking to me, however, and perhaps the most glaring gap that I see in the volume, is that the threat, as Henry describes it, and as many of us in the room routinely describe the threat of nuclear proliferation, it begins and ends with the state. It begins with the role of the state as a potential proliferator and the role of the state in preventing proliferation. And that is important, and that will always be the basis of our efforts to prevent proliferation. And I want to get beyond the role of the non-state actor in acquiring it. Let's set all of that aside and think a little bit more holistically about how proliferation actually occurs. In the earliest days of the atomic era, we certainly saw the role of the state as controlling the means of production for a nuclear weapon. It was controlled tightly by the knowledge, the materials, the technology were controlled tightly. But that world is gone. It is gone. And in my estimation, the role of the state in preventing proliferation is on a precipitous decline, and the role of industry and other actors is on the clear ascent. So what does this mean? Well, in the past, what we've tried to do is build a series of controls in which the state regulates industry. The state controls the parameters around which proliferation can occur, and that is obviously a very positive thing. In this country, I would argue, we are reaching the very limits of what those regulatory controls can exert on industry. Not internationally, for sure, but in this country, we've created certainly a culture of compliance with a set of rules that prevent proliferation, rather than fostering, in my estimation, what we should be thinking about in sort of beyond the role of the state. How do we create a culture of shared responsibility, a sense of cooperation in that space with the actors that, in fact, are the future proliferators. It's not even either knowingly or not knowingly. They're contributing to proliferation. Industry, not just in this country, but around the world. How do we get our arms around that problem? That is a field of study that, in my estimation, is undervalued. We have not thought sufficiently about it, and it desperately needs enhanced thinking. And I'm thinking beyond just the traditional technology innovators, the technology manufacturers that we think about, well, it's export controls. But there's a whole breadth up and down the global supply chain of proliferation, from insurers to the financiers to the shipping companies to the middlemen who are moving products around. Those are the actors that, frankly, are today the central pillars of any proliferation, whether it's to Iran, whether it's to a non-state actor, or whether it's to North Korea, or pick your future potential proliferator. So I really think that is a space, and that is a little bit missing, I think, Henry, in this book, and that I would really, because I know you could contribute significantly to this debate. Let me end with an anecdote to say that it also goes, I think, the role of these other actors, these non-state actors, whether it's industry or what have you, also I think goes well beyond proliferation itself. And in fact, industry in many ways is playing an outsized role increasingly, even in the wider strategic debates in the nuclear space, in this country and internationally. And let me end with a quick anecdote, if I may, Michaela, if I haven't gone too badly over my 7 minutes. Let's go back to the 1960s again, but this time go back to India in the 1960s. By virtually any measure in the 1960s, India was a developing country by any metric. Poverty rates were in the 60%. Literacy rates were down somewhere around 28%. The economy, combined GDP of India in 1960 was around a paltry $61 billion in 19. So this was a developing country since its formation in 1947. This was held true really up until the 1980s, when something different happened. Globalization happened to India, where a group of investors, foreign direct investment, essentially skyrocketed. India began welcoming foreign investment in their country. Companies in the United States and internationally began investing significant sums of money in India. And the fortunes of the average Indian, changed quite dramatically, beginning in the 1980s up through to the present day. Times were good in India, for many more than they were in the 1960s, certainly, by the turn of the millennium, which therefore dealt an especially shocking blow when, in December of 2001, a group of militants known to have operated from Pakistan attacked the Indian parliament, essentially touching off what is known as the Twin Peaks crisis. It was really the closest, I think, the two countries have ever come to an actual nuclear exchange. There were skirmishes, obviously, on the border, an extremely tense time that touched off in this town during the Bush administration, an intense period of shuttle diplomacy between the two capitals. And Deputy Secretary of State Armitage, again, on a plane back and forth between the capitals and Washington, trying to ease tensions, ultimately, as we in the proliferation community, I think, would tell the story. Secretary Armitage was ultimately successful. Tensions dropped, and life went back to a semi-regular state, as regular as it can be in South Asia. The untold part of the story, I think, however, is the more interesting part of the story, and that is this. As tensions escalated in South Asia, the U.S. Department of State issued a travel warning to American citizens and Americans living in South Asia. And the recommendation was that all American citizens, because of the potential for a nuclear exchange, should leave South Asia. So imagine you are a CEO waking up on Wall Street, and you have significant investments and significant interests in India, having made investments in that country over the course of a period of 2 decades. You wake up and you open the newspaper to a headline that says that your employees should leave India immediately. This is obviously not good for business. And so what happened was a group of very senior level CEO, C-suite executives from an array of companies, from GE, from Delta, from American Express, from United Technologies, got together And they sent a message, a very clear message to the Indian Prime Minister. This crisis is bad for business. And if we decide to leave India, we will not return. It had the ultimate effect of, I think, contributing significantly to the easing of tensions, nuclear tensions between the two countries, and a return to semi-regular relations between the two countries. This is all not to say that industry is the solution to proliferation and to wider strategic relations in the nuclear space. Certainly not. Certainly not. And it may not even be the most important. But as we understand how the world is changing, it is certainly impacting how we manage the proliferation threat. And I believe that getting out in front of this, thinking beyond the limited ability of the state to control proliferation in future, is going to be essential to successful non-proliferation efforts. But with that, Michaela, thanks again for the opportunity,
you.
and Henry, thank you again for a good read.
Okay.
Thank you, Matt.
Great. Well, it's a pleasure to be back here at the Heritage Foundation with Michaela, Brian, and Henry. So I don't know if Henry remembers this, but we first met about 8 years ago. It was a Council on Foreign Relations event. We were standing in a small circle, and Henry was about to introduce himself, and I preempted him. I said, I know who you are. You're Henry Sokolsky. I've seen you on television. I know your work on nuclear weapons proliferation. So with that, I had him at hello, and we've been friends and colleagues ever since. So congratulations on this book, Henry. It's an important achievement. I'm happy to be here to celebrate it with you today,
Okay.
and recommend it to everyone. And the price is right, so that's always
Actually,
important.
it's not right. It's free.
So, it doesn't get much better than that.
Okay.
But the book does three things. First, it's really divided into three parts. So first, it talks about what we think about nuclear weapons. Second, it talks about where we're headed. And third, it talks about what can be done. So I just wanted to structure my remarks around those three items. So first, what do we think? So Henry talked about these kind of three broad schools for thinking about nuclear weapons, and I think that's right. And Henry gives some, I think, deserved criticism to some of the academic approaches to this issue. But as a card-carrying academic, as the International Relations Field Chair at Georgetown, I feel like I need to defend my camp a little bit. So first thing I would say is, and I know Henry's well aware of this, but really there's been an explosion of, I think, quite good academic research on nuclear issues just over the past 6 years or so. So 6 years or so ago, I think it was fair to say the academic debate was, is the spread of nuclear weapons good or bad? But it's come a long way since then, so if you haven't checked out the academic literature in a while, I'd recommend it. I was actually just finishing up an article this morning for the annual review of political science on this research that's been done over the past 6 years. And one of the areas where there's a vigorous debate is something that I think you criticize us in the book for not doing enough on, and that is the relationship between the spread of nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. And there is actually a kind of a vigorous three-way debate on this issue now, and I think you know, and you're probably happy to know, is that the debate isn't about whether the spread of nuclear energy is bad for proliferation. The debate is how bad is it, with three different positions.
There's
about
a reason why we're friendly.
Yeah, well, my first book was on this exporting the bomb, and I think that's one of the things that also drew Henry and I together. So I think the research has become much better. Second, and this is something I didn't really appreciate until a few years ago, because many people criticize the academic research as being irrelevant to policymaking. And I used to think that was a problem, but as I've thought about it more, I think it makes complete sense, because really the role of academia and the role of policymaking is different, and they're a different interest. Policymakers have the responsibility for protecting U.S. national interests, protecting U.S. national security, figuring out ways to do that. But that's not the goal of academics. In PhD programs, we teach our students that your goal is to explain the world, to look at the world, gather evidence, come up with kind of generalizable hypotheses and patterns that explain that. And so sometimes that will contribute directly to policymaking, but other times it won't. So I think if you're an academic, if you look at the world and say, well, nuclear weapons haven't been used for 70 years, what's going to happen if Iran gets nuclear weapons? Will it lead to nuclear war or not? You're probably on pretty firm ground to say, well, it's probably not going to lead to nuclear war. But if you're a policymaker and somebody tells you it's probably not going to lead to nuclear war, that's not very reassuring. You might still want to do something to reduce the risk even further. So I think there's good reason for that gap. Second, on where are we headed? And overall, I thought it was a good book, but I thought this was maybe the best part of the book. And it really goes through, and I think, a pragmatic and kind of hard-headed way to look at the various threats posed by the spread of nuclear weapons and what may be just over the horizon, both in Europe and the Middle East, but with a special focus on Asia. And we've taken it for granted that we've been able to keep South Korea and Japan non-nuclear for so long, but is that sustainable as North Korea builds up its arsenal, as China becomes more assertive? What's the risk of widespread proliferation in Asia? So Henry said he was doing his best to paint a nightmare scenario. Maybe I'm too much of a pessimist, but I thought it was a very realistic, just pragmatic look at the issue. Finally, what can be done? This was the third section. Also, important section. And one of the issues I was going to raise, you raised yourself, which is, to some degree, you may have a similar problem to the zero folks. You have these clear solutions, but how do you get there? It's difficult. And I think you're absolutely right that the recommendations you make are more practical than the zero recommendations, but still difficult. So, for example, getting China on board with multilateral arms control efforts, something that this administration has tried pretty hard to do, and China is not really interested in discussing the issue. So what can we do to make China more interested in engaging on these issues? Second, a gold standard for peaceful nuclear technology. So as many of you might know, in 2008, 2010, we signed this nuclear deal with United Arab Emirates with this new gold standard for peaceful nuclear cooperation, under which the UAE agreed to forswear any enrichment or reprocessing forever, regardless of the source of the material. And so Henry proposes this as a new gold standard for all peaceful nuclear cooperation. And I think that would be wonderful, but how do you get countries to agree to that? And I think especially in the wake of this Iran deal that we may get this week, I think this is something that really concerns me about the Iran deal. Many people focus on the details, how many centrifuges, for how long, and I think this focus on the details really misses the point, because I think the fundamental problem is that we're giving ground on what's really been a principle of U.S. nonproliferation policy for 70 years, which is the spread of enrichment reprocessing to any country, even our allies, is a problem. And what this Iran deal does is make an exception, not just for any country, but for Iran, a country that's continually cheated on its agreements. And so in the wake of this deal, I think it becomes very hard for us to go to our allies, say in South Korea, and say, you know what, we trust Tehran with this sensitive nuclear technology, but we don't trust you. And so that's something I'd be interested in Henry's thoughts on as well, is how do you maintain this gold standard, especially in the wake of an Iran deal where we make such a big exception for such a problematic country. Finally, to finish up, Henry points out this gap between hawks, nuclear hawks, who think nuclear weapons matter for deterrence, and as he argues, they have a hard time combating the argument that maybe more nuclear weapons for everybody is a good thing, versus the doves who say we should just get rid of them all. And so I'll finish with a quote that I think helps to bring these schools closer together, not all the way together, but closer together. And it's from our colleague John Bolton, who was on the Jon Stewart show several years ago. And they were debating nuclear issues, and John Bolton said, you know, John, we're not actually that far apart on these issues. You don't want any country to have nuclear weapons, and I only want one country to have nuclear weapons. So I think I'll end with that and look forward to the discussion and questions.
Thank you very
Might be
much.
hard to do, too. Yeah. May I have an opportunity to comment?
Yes.
Because you got a lot of expert advice here. First, I spent about 4 years in the Pentagon doing export controls, more vigorously, I think, than anyone wanted me to. So I'm a little familiar with the limits of that effort, and I would agree, if that's what nonproliferation is, it's a wasting asset. Got it. I don't think that's what it is. I think it's an objective of international relations that you come at with many other tools, and some of them were listed. Financing. I really think you will be writing that book, not me, about industry being a big help. And the reason why is generally they are not a big help at all. They're the problem. And that's why we have government, to keep them on a short leash. Their objectives, after all, isn't just going to church. They have to make a profit. And therefore, they get driven into rather extreme deal-making. And so we have governments and government rules to try to keep them from going overboard, basically. Also, I think it's important to understand that states really still are the main event. Terrorism operates generally with state sponsorship. I mean, folks don't get their guns out of thin air. They get them from places like Saudi Arabia. They get them from, sponsors from Iran. And a certain hard-headedness about understanding that is, after all, how we leverage what little we can in that arena. And it's, how shall I put it, terrorism starts at home, and that starts generally with different states. Now, I served on several commissions that wanted to make nuclear terrorism the number one and most immediate extreme threat. They dropped it, and the reason they did is it's very hard, thankfully, still, this may change, to get specific intelligence about any of these threats. There's a lot of loose talk so far, but specific intelligence reports on this, thankfully, still are not with us. I think we need to get ahead of that by working the state problem. It's a, if you will, I won't say it's a lesser included threat, but it's so tightly related that if you don't do the state thing properly, you're not going to have much hope on the terrorism front. Maybe that's the way to put it. I guess, by the way, there are two interesting notes in this book. It's a very small book. I was told by, I was going to, I entertained two private publishers, and they got very excited about the book. And the reason why, they said, it's the ideal length. It's 30,000 words, and it's 10 of those 1,000 are notes. I said, why is that the perfect length? They said, well, it's perfect for middle school audiences, 12-year-olds. And so, I took that on board, but what I did is try to embed the book with some depth in the notes. So 64 and 42 is my recommendation. Look them up. Now, the beauty of this book, too, because I didn't go with a private publisher ultimately, is you can go online and you can click the links, and you don't have to go to the library. I think there are about 1,000 references in the book, so it's like getting 1,000 books or articles. And that's kind of neat. But in any case, the comment I guess I would make with regard to the academics, I think you protest too much. Every group, I got a phone call from someone who will remain nameless, someone we all know, and he was very excited. How dare you put me in that group? I said, well, the groups are kind of crude justice. They're not really meant to be real. They just sort of help you think about people and positions. It's not to, well, he would have none of it. I said, well, I guess, we're sort of friends. I'll take you out of the book. How's that, And he was relieved. I think with regard to academics, like him, you're better than the categories. And so there are not that many of you yet. So, the reason we're friends is I want to, if you will, encourage more of you. And some of the friends we have are like that, but they're not enough yet. So keep at it, is my advice. I suppose that's pretty much all I would say in response. I'm trying to remember, was there another point that either of you made that I haven't rejoined properly? Did I miss anything? Or should I stop?
I think you have
Let's
my points.
open it up to
Let's
questions.
open it up. Yes.
So
Anyways.
please, before you ask a question, introduce yourself, and we have 2 microphones, so wait for the microphone so that our internet viewers can hear the questions as well. Gentleman here.
It's about Iran.
Yes, my name is Russell King. I have a question about a little bit about the psychology of deception that nuclear powers may use. Now, there's a Sun Tzu saying, when we're weak, we pretend we're strong. When we're strong, we pretend we're weak. That's one example of a psychological technique the other sides could use. I think a potential nuclear power would would say, well, we're very poor, we need nuclear power, and there's a possibility that maybe a great power is secretly proliferating nuclear weapons to a terrorist group and then denying any sort of association with that group. So can you tell us what sort of psychological techniques do other nations use to decept us concerning their capabilities, their intentions, and whether or not they're proliferating?
Well, I think that the principal technique for deception is lying. It's very popular. Goes a long way. We tend to believe people who lie. I always like to say that there's certain groups that care enough about what we think to lie to us, and I always have more respect for them than getting the lecture. So lying is a big plus. The other thing, which is talked about in the book, is going right to the edge. Right? And what you do is you say, well, I'm just doing peaceful nuclear activity. Surely you agree. And of course, getting back to industry, they do. Yeah. And they make the sale. And so you want to believe everything's okay, and the next thing you know, you have something like an Iran or a North Korea on your hand. It's not so peaceful. By the way, the cover, which my wife designed, she's over here, that was the other reason I didn't want to go with a private publisher. I wanted to save the cover. And it's a picture of the Indian test explosion. It was very peaceful. It was a peaceful test explosion. Big hole. So what you do is you kind of play the suppliers as chumps. And it works too well. That's the reason I think you want to be on guard. And if I can take your question to answer a point that I missed. You asked, well, how can you get China and others to sort of want to do multilateral controls, much less the gold rule? I just came back. I'm glad you asked. I just came back from a week talking to the Japanese, Koreans, and Chinese. Guess what? They're interested. The reason they are is they're looking at one another, and they're afraid each other might be lying to one another. They're not sure about what the Japanese pile of plutonium that's peaceful may turn into. They don't know what Korea might do. And they're not yet committed to making a lot of weapons material under the name peaceful power in the case of plutonium. So there's some discussion. I think you have to find the entry point. I would probably take exception to the argument that this administration has gone to the mat to try to figure out how to deal with China. I think they backed into the brief. It's not their fault. We have done this in general. There is a terrific read I recommend in this regard by Michael Pillsbury called The 100-Year Marathon. And if you want to get paranoid, this is a great book. And when I get done with it, it makes a certain amount of sense. So I recommend it. I don't think you have to be paranoid to believe most of it. But the fact of the matter is the Chinese are not where they want to be. And as you point out, they don't want to appear strong when they're not. So there's an opportunity to talk about certain things. There's certain areas. We can do it. I don't think we've done it.
Brian, Matt, do you want to add anything? No? All right, gentlemen. Sure.
Ray Tanter, emeritus at Michigan and in and outer in government. And what I'd like to do is to raise the point about academia is not a fixed category. There are people who are serving in the government who go back to academia and who then go to think tanks. So there's some kind of a flow. I was on the NSC staff in Reagan Bush days and then went back to Michigan and then
Back.
Georgetown and so forth. The second point has to do with AQ Khan. Here is an industry backed up by a state, Pakistan. And I like to focus on the state and I like to focus on the industry. But without AQ Khan, there would have been much less proliferation, especially when backed up by a state.
Well, in all fairness, without J. Robert Oppenheimer, you could go down the list. I mean, individuals matter. Okay. Now, getting back to your more important point, which was the first point, you represent where we need to go in the instruction of public policy. I studied under Albert Wohlstetter, and he was just like yourself, someone who did the rotation. Harry Rowan is another person who worked in government, then went back and taught. Went back to government, went back and taught. There are other younger people, a handful, that do this. I think it's an excellent bracing tonic for for what ails academe, and I think it's in everyone's interest. And here's why. I lecture regularly to people in the military, and they don't know why they're in these schools. They're told they have to. But I explain. I say, well, now, does anybody know the difference between what's academic and what's serious? They laugh because they know somehow in their bones there's a big difference. And I said, well, if something's serious and you make a mistake, someone dies. Or they lose their job, at least. Washington, that's like dying. You lose your job. But if you're on the battlefield, you lose your buddy, someone really, and you have to live with that, which is almost worse than the fate of the person who got killed, if you have any conscience. So they get that. I said, what happens when you're really, really serious? You get very, very cautious, and you start doing what's called standard operating procedures. You follow the rules. And what happens frequently when you follow the rules? You get frustrated in the battlefield, and you realize the rules don't cover everything. And then you make it up. What do you use to make it up? Oh my, you don't know. Now, that's why you're in academe for a year, I explain. Because an academic, they can be wrong, and they not only don't pay a price, they get tenure. Right? As long as it's really elaborate and it's got bells and whistles and it looks pretty, damn it, you're it. But what we like about academe is their willingness to be playful. And you have to put serious people in that playful environment to think about what won't be covered by the rule book. And so there really is a very practical dimension to academe and public policy, and why some portion of the staff should rotate in and out of government. Not all, because I think your point is well taken. You want those bells and whistles guys, too. You don't want to get rid of all that colorful activity, because it is fun. And you want that fun to trigger the minds of the practical people to think out of the box, to cover those instances where the fate of a lot of people depends on them making the right decision without having the rule. Yeah?
Sir.
Hi, Pim Liu, China Stanley. And it looks like the debate on the nuclear issue is heating up in this term. And you just mentioned 3 schools.
No.
So, in your opinion, which school may prevail in the presumed nuclear posture review in 2017 and maybe 2018? And the second question, you may notice that CSIS has just published a very interesting report.
Yes.
And in this report, it said it recommend measured strategy and forward.
Measure what?
Measured strategy. Measured strategy. And they also proposed a forward deployed nuclear post.
Right.
So, in your view, all the panelists, how about these ideas?
Okay.
Thank
Let me
you.
answer the first question succinctly. I don't know, and I hope none of them do. And the reason why is they each actually have something worthwhile reflecting upon. They're not all useless. They're all partly right. That's the reason you got to read them. That's the reason you probably require them, right? I mean, when you teach. So I don't know, but let's hope none prevails, that we think beyond them or capture what's sound in each of them. In answer to your question about forward deployment, I'm a little apprehensive. I scanned the report. I thought it had that quality of unboundedness about its argumentation. It made the case, reasonably enough, about coupling, making allies feel like we'd go to the mat and basically bloody the daylights out of the enemy. I mean, that's what that's about. By the way, all wars that last long end up with lots of murders of innocents. That's the reason you really want short wars. And these things are really good if you want to kill a lot of people efficiently. Now, that isn't what they're meant to be used for, and military people know that they should be used only against military targets. But as war goes on, we get sloppy. We fight with our emotions, not our minds. And if you read any history, that's the grim truth about us humans. We're weak. So the first point is, would you want to have arguments about coupling that encouraged an unbounded enthusiasm for forward deploying and proliferating these things? I think the answer is no. Now, I worked in the Pentagon when we made the decision to take the tactical weapons out of South Korea. And the thinking at the time was, we can get the platforms that we need near or even in Korea to do that job. Why actually put the warheads there? Now, turns out the South Koreans like tactical nuclear weapons. They do. I just went there and talked with the people in the Blue House. I mean, they didn't say they liked them, but you know, they see these things as very important. I think it's important to somehow supply that need, but with as much restraint as possible, because when they're over there, you have to protect them against all sorts of possible things happening to them, including being hit, lost, whatever. And it distracts from some of the things that you absolutely have to be there with conventionally. So if there's a way you can get there with them when you need them and convince your ally that that's taken care of, that's optimal. Now, it could be a commentary on our alliance relations that people are doubting this, but that doesn't necessarily recommend giving entirely into the demands. And so that's my comment on the report. As I say, there wasn't much bounding in the report about these problems. It was more the case for, you know, reconsidering redeploying, and that's fine, but I would have liked to have seen a little bit more discussion, particularly in the executive summary, about some of the undercurrents, if you will, or downsides of going too far in that direction, if that helps. Yeah? And I just scanned it, so I mean, it's probably an unfair characterization, but you asked.
Just quickly, if I could, because you asked for all panelists' thoughts. I mean, I think, and just briefly, I think regardless of who wins in 2016, that the United States will likely have a more serious nuclear strategy and robust nuclear posture going forward. Even Hillary Clinton on Meet the Press several years ago said, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but it was something to the effect of, we're the United States, so we'll always have more nuclear weapons than everybody else, and many more than we need many times over, or something like that. So I think it was the Obama administration was really kind of unusual in this fixation on global zero and nuclear reductions. That's
we
my
won't
view.
have more than the Russians, will we?
I think she was wrong on that point. You count the
That's a
Russian
lot of
tactical, they have
that's
more.
a lot of
Yeah.
weapons.
Yeah.
Well, maybe. We'll see.
Great. Last question, sir.
Hi, Charles Perkins, APAC. This is more of a philosophical question, getting into what you're talking about time and distance and memory, that these weapons have only been used twice. 70 years is a long time, and the number of people that actually remember Japan and the open-air, above-ground tests of the 50s is going to shrink. I'm wondering if it's a concern in terms of the effectiveness of deterrence as there is proliferation, if the actual memory of the potential consequences of the use of weapons may erode and, 10, 20, 50 years from now, there's a gradual slippage of tactical nukes, perhaps especially, becoming just another battlefield weapon. That the impact of an actual nuclear detonation is blurred a little bit. And even if there is a use or a small exchange, because it's not a global conflict, 10 years after that, there'll be sort of a fading, it'll fade into history, and there'll be sort of a normalization of nuclear weapons, perhaps just tactically.
Yes.
But do you see this as
I
a
think
risk of time evolving?
I think there's a bigger problem. First, let me answer the question. I don't know. It's the reason I wrote this book. This is non-proliferation and deterrence theory and all faith-based policymaking. My church is the church of doom and gloom. Others have silly hope. I always figure if you scare them into doing the right thing early enough, you'll be okay. I don't try to, I'm not in the instruction mode of building up people's self-confidence. I like people to be slightly self-deprecating. I think it's better. Yeah? Now, in answer to your question, I think the problem's bigger. I teach, and I teach now on Capitol Hill, and I have a course that I've prepared online, which I don't recommend. It's harder than doing a book. Boy, it's a lot of work. I never realized it. If I realized it, I might not have been so eager to do it. But you need pictures. You can't do online without pictures. And I was trying to make the argument that nuclear weapons were just an efficient way to do area bombing, and we did a lot of that in the Second World War. And I remember showing these pictures to my students, and they knew nothing about Cologne. They knew nothing about Dresden. They knew nothing about Tokyo. By the way, I knew nothing about. Here's a quiz. How many people did Curtis LeMay say we killed in the North Korean War by aerial attack?
Probably pretty small.
Yeah. What do you think?
50,000.
Try 1 to 2 million. By the way, there's a reason why they dig tunnels up in North Korea. Yeah? That was normal.
Right.
We don't even remember it. You're proof. You're a pretty smart guy, I bet. Okay, so what does this tell you? The problem isn't nuclear. It isn't non-nuclear. It's forgetting how wars unfold. By the way, the last picture of my first lecture, I show a pile of bodies. And it's Dresden, and then there's another pile of bodies. It's Auschwitz. They look exactly the same. One, however, is defended as a proportionate act of war that's justifiable, and the other is a war crime. Now, I think our moral springs, are busted. We've got to be more sensitive to the mass killing of innocents. If we do, that will be your protection, not whether nuclear weapons get used or not. By the way, the problem with nuclear weapons is that they're so indiscriminate. Even the most, discriminate of them are enormous in the amount of release. I mean, you're talking about a kiloton. It's 1,000 tons of. There's no conventional weapon that's a kiloton, and so you're in the business of doing something a little heavy-handed. You really want to figure out how to get business done without resorting to that, if you can. Being cognizant of what wars unfold as, seeing how we lose our moral bearing. You don't have to focus just on nukes. By the way, one last thing I just learned. Do you know that the RAF had no memorial until the mid-90s? Do you know why? The British felt guilty. Good for them. You've got to have that memory. If you have that memory, I think we'll be a lot safer. And I don't know that we have to demonize nuclear weapons to get that down correctly.
On that happy note, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for coming, our panelists, and Henry, and join me in thanking our speakers.
Congratulations.